Could this be the video that gets me cancelled? In my last video, I detailed the positive aspects of living here, all the wonderful things in Japan that enrich my life. So please make sure you've watched that video before you watch this one. In this video, watch me unleash my pent-up frustrations as I detail what I hate about living here. By the end of this video, you'll know if the negatives to life in Japan outweigh the positives of life in Japan. I'm a bit nervous to get into this one, but here we go. Number 1. Work-life balance, or lack thereof. Under Japanese labor laws, the full-time working week is capped at 40 hours. But you and I both know that Japan's work culture is not that cut and dry. 40 hours means 5 8-hour days, but let's look at the ways that 40 hours is extended. At my first teaching job, my 1-hour lunch break was not included in those 40 hours. It was work 4 hours, take a 1-hour unpaid lunch break, and then work another 4 hours, making for a 9-hour day. In addition to that, I was told to come in early every day. While teaching didn't begin till 12, I was told to come to an 11:45 meeting every morning. That meeting would last until 12 exactly, when I had to start my first class. So I'd need to come even earlier than 11:45 to set up my classroom, arriving at 11:30. And worst of all, being made to stay back late. In Japanese, it's called zangyo, overtime. Every night, I'd have more responsibilities beyond the finish time of 9 o'clock, meaning I wouldn't leave until 9:30 at the earliest. So by starting earlier and finishing later, we've added another hour onto the working day, making it 10 hours. Multiply that by 5, and you've got yourself a 50-hour working week. And of course, there were times I was asked to come in even earlier or stay back even later, have extra work encroach on my lunch hour, and work evening parties to entertain adult students, making it a 60+ hour working week being paid at a 40-hour working week. And my case is just a simple one. I know people who've had it far worse, especially local Japanese people working for Japanese black companies. And not only will work encroach on your free time, but your sanity too. At a company like the last one I was at, I wasn't even allowed a moment's rest during the working day, as they'd pack appointments and other responsibilities in the short windows between classes, or if a class was cancelled, they'd find some arbitrary record-keeping or cleaning task for me to do. I couldn't help but feel they just wanted to keep me busy. This applies to most Japanese companies, not just teaching. Workers in Japan are expected to be busy at all hours on the job, which has led to a culture of looking busy rather than actually being busy. In rare moments of downtime, I came up with ways to look busy and therefore be left alone. Compare this to Australia, where I grew up, where work-life balance is king. The minimum full-time working week there is 35 hours, and free time is untouchable. I'm fortunate enough at the moment to be teaching a private lesson to a professor, and he told me when he called his Australian counterpart on a Sunday to ask a question about their research, he was politely told to piss off as it was a Sunday. Untouchable weekends don't exist here, as you're expected to reply to emails and messages in a timely manner, even on your days off. And finally, when I studied abroad in France in high school, my host dad would come home for 2.5 hours at lunchtime, enjoy a home-cooked lunch by his wife, and then take a nap. This would certainly never happen here in Japan, meaning you'll probably just scoff down a convenience store sandwich and a can of coffee during your short lunch break. To sum this up, Japan does have one of the worst working cultures in the developed world. Compounding this is the low base salary, the worst of all G7 countries. But change could be on the horizon. Since the pandemic, more companies are embracing remote or hybrid work, and with the majority of younger people refusing overtime or mandatory drinking parties, the future is looking just that little bit brighter. Anyway, time for a lighter topic. Number 2, the weather. If you've watched my other videos on this channel, you might have the impression that Japan has perpetually sunny and beautiful weather. I hate to say I've misled you, as on those days I've chosen to shoot because it is a nice day. Such nice days are as rare as legendary Pokemon. Since moving here, I've realized that I've taken Australia's always nice weather for granted, where it's nice and warm most of the year with a couple of cool and rainy months in the middle. Japan's weather, by contrast, is an absolute mess. People in Japan love to tell you that Japan has 4 seasons, but it's more like it has 6, and all of them are equally terrible. At the beginning of the year is winter, and boy is it miserable. You might get lots of clear days with blue skies, but the temperature outside is freezing, so you can't take advantage of those blue skies for photos, as all of the trees and bushes are stripped of leaves and flowers. And because apartment walls in Japan are thin for earthquake safety, if you decide to huddle up at home, you'll still be a human popsicle. In the winter months here in Tokyo, I have to put on 2 layers of sweatpants, 2 hoodies, a beanie, tuck my pants into my socks, and I am still cold. Even when I crank the heater, I still shiver and wake up frozen. And when spring finally hits, the relief of warm weather and beautiful cherry blossoms is undercut by that annual nightmare, hay fever. After the Second World War, the Japanese government planted acres and acres of cedar trees, or sugi, to use as future building materials. As technology progressed, cheaper materials like steel and concrete were favoured over wood, leading to a surplus of cedar trees across the country. When spring hits, these billions of trees release pollen, leading to watering eyes and running noses nationwide. In fact, many Japanese people book holidays to Okinawa around this time just to escape the pollen. In my first year here, I didn't experience any reaction to cedar pollen, but it's been found the longer a foreigner stays in Japan, the more they will experience a reaction to this pollen. Last year I started to feel it a little bit more, and this year was particularly brutal. For the whole month of March, my eyes were crying and I was constantly scratching the back of my neck, which was irritated by pollen. And after that, it's the rainy season, Tsuyu. Humidity sets in and the rain just does not stop. Well, it might stop on days where you're stuck in a windowless office, but you can be guaranteed rain will continue on the weekend, making it a pain in the ass to go outside or to do your laundry. As electric dryers aren't a thing here, you'll definitely fall behind on your washing. Then comes the summer, which is a hot and humid tropical nightmare. You'll be sweating buckets, and when crammed onto a busy train, you'll be smelling everyone else's BO. And the worst part about this is trains, restaurants, and cafes crank their AC to an insane level, meaning you'll go from boiling hot temperatures outside to freezing cold temperatures inside in an instant, causing havoc on your immune system. And finally comes autumn, the best time of the year. Just kidding. Before that is the typhoon season. Just like the rains of the rainy seasons, the respectful typhoons only come on weekends, so as not to disrupt the working week. They'll cancel your plans and potentially ground your flight if you're unlucky enough to be traveling at that time. And finally, autumn. As beautiful as the red foliage is, the constant fluctuation of air pressure in October and November gives me headaches and makes me sick. Then it's back to winter again, shivering behind those thin walls of yours. And speaking of thin walls, that leads me to my next point. Number 3, renting. If you're a foreigner in Japan, you'll likely have to rent a tiny shoebox. In my first job, I was put in company housing, which took the form of a Leo palace. I didn't really mind it, small as it was. I barely spent any time in it, as I was either working or exploring Japan on weekends. While company-provided housing was nice, it was my undoing when it was time to change jobs. If you quit a job that provides housing, you'll soon find yourself with nowhere to live. Once I accepted the offer of a new job, a fire was lit under my ass, and I had to find a place as soon as possible. The only day I could get to a rental agency was a Sunday, so my partner and I looked at a few places on that Sunday, none of which were ideal, but nice enough. Only one of them was in our price range, so we chose it. I'll never forget what the realtor said next. We now have to call the landlord and ask him if he's okay with foreigners renting. That language speaks for itself. I remember sitting there nervously as the phone conversation went on. If he had said no, we'd be shit out of luck and we would have to look at places in another neighborhood, already having given up half the day. You can't imagine our relief after a long pause like she was announcing an Academy Award. He said yes. Since moving in, I've met the landlord and he's a nice guy. But I can't stress how unbelievably lucky we were. Getting rejected just for being a foreigner is quite common, as most of my foreign friends have experienced housing rejection just for not being Japanese. Looking at it from the Japanese perspective, I can understand that apprehension a little bit. Perhaps they think foreigners will just up and leave, or they've had bad experiences in the past, but these are inexcusable. In most other developed countries, refusal based on nationality would not be okay. Like I said, this is not an ideal place, but it's enough. When I share how I live with most people I grew up with, people who are now settling down and moving into townhouses with big gardens, they can't comprehend how a couple of guys in their 30s squeeze themselves into a couple of tiny rooms in the middle of Tokyo. Not only that, as I mentioned earlier, the walls are so thin in these flats that it gets so cold in winter and hot as hell in summer. And as earthquake-safe houses are designed to sway when an earthquake hits, when our neighbor slams their door, the whole place shakes. And finally, how much does this all cost? Well, this is the worst part. For 2 rooms, a small kitchen, and a combined toilet and shower in the middle of Tokyo, we pay 95,000 yen a month. A lot of that is because of the convenient location we chose, and it's still a hell of a lot cheaper than the average Tokyo rent. It's old and small, which is why it's so low. Or considering how little space we have, perhaps it's high? I'll let you be the judge of that. But to wrap up this section, that's your only option if you want to live in Tokyo. Live in a shoebox close to the center, or go an hour out to the suburbs to get a bit more space. And speaking of going out to the suburbs, number 4, commuting. I have a love-hate relationship with Japanese trains. On this channel, I've made a few videos showcasing unique trains, like the cute Enoden by the coast in Kanagawa, the unexpected monorail in Tokyo's outer suburbs, or the cute cat train in upmarket Setagaya. While these might be the stuff of a rail otaku's dreams, for every dream there is a nightmare, and that nightmare comes in the form of the rush hour commute. When I settled on living in this place, I knew I was in for an hour-long commute every day. How hard could it be? It's only an hour. And I thought I was cheating the system too, as I lived in central Tokyo and commute an hour out to the suburbs. I thought by going against the flow of commuters coming into the city for work, I would have a peaceful and relaxing commute. Sweet summer child that I was, I couldn't have been any more wrong. Each day, going out is just as bad, with hundreds of students and salarymen crammed into metal coffins on wheels in the name of getting to work or school on time. You've undoubtedly seen those images of station staff literally stuffing commuters into trains, and while thankfully my daily commute is not that bad, I have been on the receiving end of that, and I can assure you it is not pleasant at all. During the pandemic, commuter numbers dropped as a lot of businesses started embracing hybrid or remote work, so for a couple of years it wasn't too bad. But in 2023, a lot of companies have started enforcing their employees to come back to the office, so the daily number of commuters is almost back to where it was, plus the sudden influx of baffled-looking tourists too. A lot of Japanese people lament this as well, and many propose the solution of Japanese companies decentralizing their businesses, as most companies put their offices within the loop of the JR Yamanote line, which connects the major centers of Shinjuku, Shibuya, Shinagawa, and Marunouchi. Perhaps a lot of companies should just relocate out of Tokyo altogether. And then there's delays. While Japan's trains are known for their punctuality, when there's an accident it can turn your routine morning into absolute chaos. If your line goes down, you have to solve the greatest puzzle of all, which is using Google Maps to find an alternate roundabout way of getting to work on time. And if you are late, you still have to apologize to your boss despite none of it being your fault. At this point, you're probably thinking most big cities around the world have rush hour commutes and that they are just a part of life, which is certainly true. Perhaps I don't have enough commuting experience outside of Japan, so please tell me what commuting is like in your country. And finally, perhaps the most obvious and my most shameful point, number 5, the language barrier. Do you know what I studied at university? Too dumb to get into an actual useful program like engineering, medicine, or law, my program was Bachelor of Languages, majoring in French and Chinese. Why not Japanese? Well, I had originally wanted to work in either France or China, but neither of those options worked out, so I ended up here. I do regret not majoring in Japanese, as I didn't make effort to learning the language until after I'd already moved here. And it's no secret that my Japanese sucks, as I've struggled with it way more than I did with French and Chinese. You know what? To demonstrate this point, it's time for me to do what I get paid to do and give you a language lesson. So, what do English, French, and Chinese all have in common? They are all SVO languages, meaning basic sentence structure is the same. Subject, verb, object. For example, I eat pizza. I is the subject, eat is the verb, pizza is the object. In French, that's je mange de la pizza. Je is I, the subject, mange is eat, the verb, de la pizza is pizza, the subject. In Chinese, it's 我吃披萨. 我 is I, the subject, 吃 is eat, the verb, 披萨 is pizza, the subject. We can see it's the same order each time. Now, let's look at Japanese. Watashi wa pizza o tabemasu. Watashi is I, the subject. Pizza is pizza, the object. Tabemasu is eat, the verb. So now we're looking at subject, object, verb, SOV. This order trips me up every time. as when I'm formulating sentences in my mind, I have to think about things I want to say in a different order. I can no longer think I eat pizza, but have to think I pizza eat. And we haven't even gotten to the writing systems yet. There are 48 squiggly hiragana representing the 48 sounds in the Japanese language. Then there are their more angular katakana counterpart, those used to represent foreign words. And then to spice things up are the kanji, thousands of Chinese characters used to represent whole words. You might remember I studied Chinese, but the way Chinese characters are used in Japanese is often completely different to Chinese. So the Chinese and Japanese wires in my brain get crossed, causing a lexical short circuit. And in Japanese there's also different levels of formality, different verb conjugations, name suffixes, particles, oh and look, I've just gone cross-eyed. Point is, it's a hard language to learn, and after having learned both French and Chinese, I can attest to Japanese being significantly harder than those two. I was taking Japanese lessons for a couple of years before the pandemic with a nice old lady in a cafe, but once the pandemic started we lost touch and I still haven't gotten back into it. I still do a bit of study here and there, but I keep putting it off. Considering working, commuting, and now learning editing and YouTubing, it's permanently on the back burner, which is not helpful in looking for a new job. I have to weigh up which is more important, learning the new skills of videography and editing, which is truly what I want to do, or using that time to grind out kanji in the hopes of passing a Japanese proficiency test. If you're serious about moving to Japan, do not be like me. Major in the language if you can, or at least make an effort to get good at it before you come here. Thankfully, as I said in my last video, the majority of people here are kind, considerate, and patient, so it doesn't really cause that many issues. But man, it is a bloody hard language. So, what did you think? Now that I've weighed up both the positives and negatives of life in Japan, is there more good than bad? Or more bad than good? There's more good than bad. Those positive aspects to life here make me grateful I've had the privilege to settle here, having met hundreds of amazing people, having eaten thousands of tasty dishes, and having been blessed every day by a mostly convenient and comfortable lifestyle. The negatives in this video are the prices you have to pay to live in this society, perhaps the closest to a utopia there is on Earth. Although I must say, it is quite a heavy toll after all, but I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world. But what I'm most interested in are your thoughts. How do the points I discussed compare to life in your country? Please let me know down below and I'll reply to you. Well, I sincerely hope I'm not cancelled after that video. If you think I don't deserve to be cancelled, please subscribe to this channel. And now I'm off to study some Japanese. I'll see you next time.